Good afternoon. Welcome back to our weekly class on Ethics of the Fathers. Right now is the actual time when it's customary to study it every Shabbos. The weeks between Passover and Shavuos, there are 6 Sabbaths, and each Sabbath we study one chapter. This week we're going to start chapter 1, but we're doing it throughout the whole year. So we're up to chapter 2 of the second cycle. We did all 6 chapters over the last, I don't know how many years, at least 5 years, maybe more. And now we're doing the second cycle, and we're up to the second chapter and the second Mishna. So the second Mishna of the second chapter of the second cycle of the study of Ethics of the Fathers. The last Mishnah, the first Mishnah of the chapter 2, quoted Rebbe. Rebbe is the short version of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, who is the compiler, the editor of the Mishnah, and was the leader of the Jewish people. He was not only the spiritual leader, but he was also the actual leader. He had the authority and the power, just as any leader of any country has. He had that power. So he was referred to sometimes as his name and his title, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, or sometimes he's referred to by a laudatory term, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, our holy teacher. And sometimes, as in Ethics of the Fathers, in the first Mishnah, he's referred to as Rabbi, just plain Rabbi. If you just say Rabbi, you know that you're talking about Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. That was the first Mishnah, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, his teaching was about how you have to find balance. Things that you have to do have to bring out beauty for the person who's doing it and for others as well. In Yiddish, there's an expression that they use, zu Gottens und zu Leitens. You're a person who's good to God and good to other people. That's one interpretation of his teaching, but we're not going to go back into his teaching. That was one of his primary teachings, and now we're going to be doing something from his son, Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. Now, I mentioned in the last few classes that there were many Rabbi Gamliels. Rabbi Gamliel was the favorite name of the dynasty. They started with Hillel. Hillel's son was Rabbi, and Shimon as well. Rabbi Hillel's son was Shimon, whose son was Rabbi Gamliel. He's known as Rabbi Gamliel Hazaken, the elder one, because his son was Rabbi Shimon, whose son was Rabbi Gamliel of Yavne. That's how we distinguish the two Rabbi Gamliels. Rabbi Gamliel of Yavne had a son whose name was Rabbi Shimon. That's the third Shimon, who had a son, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi.
Is the word Hazakan, elder, related to Zikor, remember?
No relationship. Yeah. And yes.
Same Rabbi Gamliel that is quoted in the Haggadah?
No. That Rabbi Gamliel is either the first Rabbi Gamliel or the second one. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi had 2 sons, and he named them, I'll give you two guesses. One he named Rabbi Gamliel, and one he named Rabbi Shimon. And what happened was a little strange, because when he passed away, who became his successor? Because until then, it was one rabbi who was the leader. From Hillel down, all the way to Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, it was one leader who combined 2 roles of the leader of the Sanhedrin, the head rabbi, the highest authority of Jewish law, and also the political leader of the Jewish people. It was combined and consolidated in one person. But when Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi passed away, he changed things. Before he passed away, he divided those 2 roles into 2 people. Rabbi Shimon was going to be the leading sage, the leading rabbi, and Rabbi Gamliel will be the nasi, will be the leader, the political leader. Apparently, he felt that the burden of combining two was too much for one person, and maybe they weren't of the caliber of their predecessors who were able to combine both very, very important and very taxing positions of leadership. Each one was a full-time job. It's like having the president, the chief of the Supreme Court, the chief justice of the Supreme Court at the same time.
That's what we have now.
That's a discussion for a different time.
Right, but that would be a very difficult task to be able to do both. Although the Chief Justice, I don't know how hard he has to work. He has clerks, he has people working for him. He doesn't have to do everything by himself. But in the case of the sages, from Hillel down to Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, they all had these two different functions. And now it was divided into two. So now we're dealing with Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, who was not the head scholar, but he was the leader, the actual leader of the Jewish people at that time. Now, another thing changed historically. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi lived at a time, at the peak of Rome's goodness, if you could say. There was ever a time that Rome was good. The leader of Rome, whose name I mentioned last week, known in Hebrew short by one of his names, Antoninus. I guess it's Antonio or Antoninus, whatever it is in Latin or Greek, whatever language. What?
It's an IUS.
Antoninus. So Antoninus, some say that he even converted to Judaism, but he was very benign. He was a benign leader and respected Judaism and respected Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, with whom he had a very cordial relationship. And Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi was the wealthiest person around. He not only rivaled other kings, he was wealthier than most other kings, and it was equal to the Roman emperor in terms of his wealth.
Is Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi the codifier of the Talmud?
Of the Mishna.
The Mishna. Because he had that special time.
So he had the opportunity to gather all of the great sages with all of their knowledge collectively. He was able to put together and formulate the Mishnah from all existing knowledge of the oral traditions that were passed down for millennia. He was able to hire all these scholars and pay them, support them. They didn't have to work. Their work was just scholarship. Their work was just teaching and collecting knowledge and putting it all together in a very systematic way, which turned out to be the Mishnah, the second most important teachings of Judaism after the Bible, after the Tanakh. The next major work was the Mishnah, before the Gemara, before the Talmud, which was the next major work. So,
how many years after that until it was written?
Okay, there's a dispute between Rashi and the Rambam. According to Rashi, Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi did not write the Mishnah. He merely collected it orally. Maybe they took notes, but it was not put into writing until later. Not much later, but in the next few generations. According to Maimonides and others, he put it into writing. It's I think of minor significance, because whatever they put into writing was what Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi put together. So now we're dealing with Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, who had the luxury of supporting scholars, thousands of them. They didn't have to work for a living to sustain themselves. But with the passing of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, there was also the end of an era in Rome. The Roman Empire started to fall apart, and things were becoming much more difficult financially and politically. And maybe that's another reason why he had to divide the leadership into two, because you needed a leader who could devote more time to being a leader and not have to be involved with the legal aspects of the Jewish law.
It's also much more difficult to compromise the Jewish people when you have two two checks and balances. If you have one,
Okay, that could be as well. But whatever happens, there's probably historical reasons why the position of leadership had to be split up. With that backdrop, we could perhaps understand a little bit better what Rabbi Gamliel is saying. He would say the following. In Hebrew, the Hebrew word used that they translate here as excellent, frustrating about translations. The word Yafeh in Hebrew can mean so many things. It's usually used to mean something beautiful. Yafeh is beautiful.
not Mitsuyan.
Mitsuyan is excellent.
Yeah.
Yafeh is more translated as beautiful, but it doesn't necessarily just mean beauty as in aesthetic beauty, beautiful picture, a beautiful person. Although what you can say that about that it's a beautiful answer,
Yafeh was always translated as nice with an exclamation.
Nice, beautiful, yes. So they transferred it into the word excellent. But I would think with no reason why you can't translate it literally beautiful. I'll soon go into what I think it means specifically, because it could have used other expressions. Could have just said tov, it's good to study Torah. It's the best thing to study Torah combined with a worldly occupation. But we'll leave it at this meanwhile. Excellent or beautiful is the study of the Torah when combined with a worldly occupation. Now, based on the introduction I just gave you can understand what he's trying to say over here. Yeah, my dad's lifetime, the focus was on Torah study without worldly occupation because we had the luxury, didn't have to struggle to work to support ourselves. We had Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, he was supporting all the scholars. And Ethics of the Fathers is written for everyone, but it's especially written for rabbis and judges. Many of the teachings you can see clearly are directed towards rabbis and who were always judges. That's the definition. That was the practical function of a rabbi, to be a judge of Jewish law. And he's saying you can't just be content with teaching Torah and learning Torah, because now we don't have the luxury of being able to support ourselves without having to work for it. So it makes it much better when the Torah study is combined with worldly occupation.
It's interesting you're quibbling about, I should say quibble, but obviously disagreement is trying to translate Yafeh. So I would think derech eretz we think about as something else.
Okay, we're going to get into that. What exactly does the original word mean? They translated it here as worldly occupation.
So you could say
well, the Mishna actually changes and it uses a different word later, malacha. The commentators deal with that, why it changes the term that's used, but we'll leave it the way it is over here. Meanwhile, that the study of Torah, when it's combined with worldly occupation, that's beautiful, that's nice. Now, there's another thing that this might be Rabbi Gamliel's telling us. Whenever rabbis spoke, they tried to show that we don't have to follow what you normally expect. You normally expect people who are wealthy to shun work. You inherited, you know the story of the guy who showed how he became a billionaire. He says, I used to collect soda bottles and I used to bring them in and get a nickel here, a nickel there. Then I started, giving out newspapers, and then my rich uncle left me $100 million. That's the way to make a lot of money, from rags to riches.
But I still take the bottles.
So, someone like Rabbi Gamliel, who grew up in affluence, he grew up in the richest possible home in the entire world, perhaps at that time. He grew up as you'd think he was a spoiled brat to grow up in such opulence and affluence. And he's telling us, no, don't think that I don't appreciate what work is, what hard work is. that if you just have Torah without hard work, then it's not the ideal. As we'll soon see what the problems could be. So Rabbi Gamliel is the perfect model of someone who is not spoiled by wealth. In fact, his father, who was the owner of all this wealth, before he passed away, he raised his hands up high and he says, I haven't enjoyed the material world not even as much as a little pinky. He says, I was completely oblivious to all this wealth. It meant nothing to me. The wealth was all part of the embellishment of his position to have influence and to be able to support the scholars and to be able to devote himself to putting together the Mishna. He didn't care about wealth, and he didn't look for enjoying his wealth. That was not why he had wealth or what he cared about. And apparently he passed this down to his son Rabbi Gamliel. Although no one was going to say Rabbi Gamliel was on the same level of his father, there's a general idea in the Talmud that as generations go, they decline. That's not a hard and fast rule. There are many exceptions to that rule, but that's a general rule. Because the closer you are to Mount Sinai, the more elevated you are as a general rule. Now, the Hebrew word used here is derech eretz. This is an elusive term because it can mean so many different things. Some commentators translate it as work, employment, being engaged in gainful employment is a good thing, not to just sit and learn Torah, which is the argument some people bring against the people in Israel who study in yeshivas, not only up until their marriage and maybe a few years after their marriage, but some are there for a lifetime. It's not uncommon to find a grandfather, a father, and a grandson studying in the same yeshiva. They're all studying for full time, and and how do they support themselves? Some places the kollel pays you enough to pay your rent, maybe not even that. But the wives are usually the ones who work, and in these cases, the wives are thrilled to be able to support their husbands learning Torah. That's a cultural thing. If that's what you're raised on, that's the most important thing to study Torah, then these women are heroes for working hard to support their husbands' learning of Torah. So Rabbi Gamliel seems to be speaking against that. That you could do that if you can afford to do that, but it's not Yafeh. It's not beautiful. It's lacking beauty. Beauty is a product of balance. I'm harping on the idea of balance because it's a very important thing. Where today, we're in the period called Sefira. Sefira is where we count the days between Passover and Shavuos, and every day has a different attribute. There are 7 attributes. The first is Chesed, kindness, associated with love. The second one is Gevura, judgment, discipline. And the third one is Tiferes, beauty. Why is it called beauty? Because it's considered to be a synthesis between Chesed and Gevura. That's what beauty is, when there's a synthesis. If you have a piece of art with one color, you'd say it's a piece of art. It has value, but if it has different colors and hues, it makes it beautiful.
Tiferes is also compassion, or no?
It's associated with compassion, but we won't go into that right now because it'll take us too much off the subject. Just remember, there's a story, the guy comes to an art show and he sees this artist with a canvas that had one black spot on it. How much do you want for this? $10,000. Takes out his checkbook and writes a check for $10,000. Comes back a year later, the same artist is there with a canvas with 2 black dots. And he asks, how much is it? He said, it's $20,000. I'm not interested. Why aren't you interested? I thought you were a connoisseur. You appreciated my art last year. He said, you have 2 dots. It's zu viel angepatschket. In Yiddish, that means it's too messy. So if you want to have a beautiful piece of art, I should have saved that for the next series on jokes. So you won't tell anyone this joke because I'm going to use it again. The definition of beauty, as Hasidic philosophy emphasizes over and over again in Kabbalah, is when you have an amalgam, you have a synthesis of different colors, of different traits. A person who's monolithic, who's just monochrome, just one personality, is not you wouldn't call that a beautiful, not a bad person for sure. A person who only has kindness, can never do any bit of discipline, can never really tell a person, no, you can't do this, it's wrong, has no sense of right and wrong, just everything goes. That's not beautiful. Or a person who's just very rigid and very demanding and shows no leniency. That person is also a boring person. When do you get an exciting person? When they have different traits and they're able to blend them successfully. So that's what Rabbi Gamliel is saying. If you want something to be beautiful, if you want Torah to be beautiful, it should be combined with derech eretz. But I still haven't said what does the word derech eretz mean. So some commentators say it means work, employment. Some say derech eretz is a term used for proper ethics. If a person doesn't behave nicely, they didn't commit a crime, but they just don't behave nicely. Say they have no derech eretz. They have no, in Yiddish we'd say menschlichkeit, decency. They're not morally or ethically astute. They'll follow the law. They won't do anything that's illegal, but they're not nice about things.
Is this derech eretz the same eretz Yisrael? Is it the same eretz?
Eretz means earth or world. So derech eretz means the way of the world. So some say the way of the world means work. The way people survive is by work. And some say derech eretz means being a mensch, being a decent and good person. That Torah is not enough, you have to have derech eretz. That's one of the reasons, by the way, that it's customary to study ethics of the fathers before Shavuos. Shavuos is the anniversary of the giving of the Torah. But before you can get the Torah, you have to have derech eretz. You have to be a decent person. If you're a rotten person and not a nice person, then you're not receptive to Torah either. And then the Torah doesn't look very nice on you. It's like wearing a very disgusting garment. People are going to look at you and say you're not a nice. You don't look decent. Well, but it's only a garment. Yeah, but the garment is what defines the person sometimes. So that we put on our beautiful garment before we get the Torah. And they tell this joke. This is insulting to all Jews. Right.
Right.
Maybe. German Jews, they're called Yekis. They're known for their punctuality. They're known for their derech eretz, for their menschlichkeit. They're very much into that, but they're not so steeped in Torah knowledge. Of course, this is an unfair generalization, but that's the way the joke goes. Jokes don't have to be 100% accurate. But the Russian or the Polish Jews, on the contrary, they're very, Lithuanian especially, are very advanced when it comes to Torah knowledge, but they have no derech eretz. They'll push and they're not going to be very polite. So what happened why is that? Why did that happen? So the answer is when God announced that He's giving the Torah, He says, I'm giving it 8 a.m. Well, who was there? The German Jews were all there because they are always punctual. You go to a German Jewish synagogue 5 minutes before 9, if the davening is 9 o'clock, no one's there. 9 o'clock, the place is full because they're punctual. So they were all there. So they heard the lecture about derech eretz, about being decent and menschlich. And as soon as they finished that lecture, they left. So they never got the Torah. They got the derech eretz, but not the Torah. The Russian Jews were all late, as Russian Jews are prone to be. No insult to the Russian Jews, because I'm one of them. And we're all late. So they missed the whole lecture about derech eretz, but they came to hear the Torah. That's why they know Torah, but they have no derech eretz. So this is insulting to everyone. But the truth is, you need to have both. You can't have one without the other. So that's another definition of derech eretz. A third definition of derech eretz, and I don't remember. I think it's from the Baal Shem Tov, but I checked my notes. It doesn't say who it's from. That derech eretz refers to prayer. Because what is prayer essentially about? The word prayer, whatever it means in English, in Hebrew, there are two parts of prayer. There's the part of prayer that is praising God. It's to get us closer to God. But there's another part, and according to some, that's the main part of prayer, is petitioning God, asking God for things that we need. So the Talmud, when it compares prayer to Torah, says Torah is Chaye Olam, deals with eternal life. Torah is God's wisdom. It's eternal life. Doesn't deal with temporal things. Doesn't deal with material things that are here and now and gone tomorrow. They're here now, but they're not going to last. But prayer is called Chaye Shah, the life of the moment, where you ask God for things. Things are momentarily. They're only here now. Tomorrow you're not going to need them. They'll be gone tomorrow. So when it comes to Torah and prayer, Torah trumps prayer, according to the Talmud. But if someone says, I have Torah, but I don't need prayer, that's not nice. Prayer is an embellishment for Torah.
It's like a car without the keys.
Or it's like trying to get into the main entrance of the home, but you can't get through the outer entrance. You still can't get in, even though it's only the outer one. It's the one on the porch before you get into the main house, but it's crucial to get in through that. There are many different metaphors for that. So derech eretz can mean the way of the land, the way of the earth, the way we deal with earthly things is that we pray to God. Then another meaning of derech eretz, which seems to connect to something we have a little bit later in the Mishnah, is secular studies. I didn't see any commentary saying that, so I'm going to risk venturing a guess that it might have that meaning. And the reason I say that is because the word Yafeh, beautiful. Where's the first place in the Torah where the word, or a word associated with Yafeh appears? Beauty. Does anyone know? Not the word Yafeh, but a variation of that word. Yaft Elikim leyefet. Noach, remember Noach, my grandfather? I think it's your grandfather also. That's about 4,000 years ago. Noach had 3 sons. And what happened after the flood was over, Noach gets drunk and he exposes himself. Chum, or Ham as they say appropriately in English, gloats in his father's nakedness, and he tells his brothers about it. Hey, Dad, look what Dad is doing. And Shem and Yafeh took a garment and they walked backwards so they shouldn't see their father's shame, and they covered him. And God rewarded the 2 sons that had respect for their father. And the reward was Yafeh Elikim leyefet. God should show beauty to Yafet. Yafet is related to the word Yafeh, beauty. God should show beauty to Yafet. V'yishkam ba'olei Shem, and he will dwell in the tents of Shem. So the Talmud explains that refers to the 2 temples. The first temple was built by King Solomon, who was a descendant of Shem. The second temple was built by the Jews, of course, but under the direction of the Persian emperor, of Cyrus. And Persia is one of the descendants of Yafet. But another descendant of Yafet was Greece. And what is Greece known for? For secular knowledge, for aesthetics, for beauty, for outer beauty. They revered, they deified the human body and the beauty, aesthetic beauty, and all of the Greek knowledge is geared to show us the beauty of God's creation. So the first temple, which was a higher level, was connected directly to Shem, because Shem was the real operator there. He was the one who led the Yafet. Yafet was only coming along, but he was not the main actor there in covering up their father. So some have understood this to mean that what's the ideal way of learning Torah? Learning Torah where you combine it with secular knowledge. That's what some people say, that when you take secular knowledge and use it as an adornment to the Torah, not as a co-equal with the Torah, but as an adornment to embellish the Torah, the Gaon of Vilna, who was one of the greatest Talmudic scholars, said you have to have secular knowledge in order to appreciate Torah. The Samson Raphael Hirsch, the German Orthodox rabbi, the leader of German Jewish orthodoxy in Germany at a time when everyone was going away from Judaism, he emphasized Torah im derech eretz. He referred to it as derech eretz, Torah with the way of the land, which he referred to.
Yeshiva University.
And then Yeshiva University, there's a whole big debate if they're the same as Hirsch or they're different from Hirsch, but in general it's the same idea. Torah umada is the slogan of Yeshiva University, Torah and science. Torah and knowledge, referring to secular knowledge. But whatever, the idea that secular knowledge has something to add to Torah in terms of embellishing it. But even if you don't agree with those philosophies that focus on secular knowledge as being an adornment to Torah, everyone recognizes that certain kinds of secular knowledge are needed for Torah to be complete. For example, if you don't know astronomy, you can't practice the laws of the Jewish calendar. Maimonides, in his Code of Law, the Mishna Torah, devotes almost 20 chapters.
But that's not secular knowledge, that's Jewish knowledge, astronomy.
Well, it's let me just I'll soon get to that. Maimonides devotes a whole section, about 20 chapters, to the laws of sanctifying the new moon. 15 of those chapters, about 14, 15, are astronomy. And Maimonides writes, the original books of astronomy were written by the tribe of Yisachar, one of the 12 tribes. They were the greatest scholars of astronomy, but their books were lost. So our knowledge of astronomy comes from the Greeks. And I'm going to tell you what they say, because what they say happens to be true. And Maimonides is totally accurate with everything he said astronomically to the split second, without having all the modern telescopes and all the modern technology that we have. At any rate, if you don't know those laws, although we don't need them now because now we have a calendar, but when Mashiach comes and we're going to go back to the sighting of the moon and you have to have the astronomical knowledge, we're going to have to learn astronomy. Rabbis will have to know astronomy if they're going to be involved in this area. And to one extent or another, when we study, the Rebbe instituted studying the Rambam every year, we study the entire Mishnah Torah, 1,000 chapters, 3 chapters a day. There is a week in which we're studying the laws of astronomy. That's one part of Maimonides that I have the most difficulty with, but it's there. We get some very rudimentary understanding of the operation of the sun and the moon.
What is the average pages of those chapters of the 1,000 chapters? What's the average of a chapter of a page?
Each chapter doesn't go by pages because the most editions are printed with commentary, so it depends on the commentaries. But each chapter has anywhere from like 10 to 30 paragraphs. Yeah. But each paragraph could actually be several paragraphs, but he divided it into one paragraph. So we're talking about 20,000 paragraphs. Is a rough estimate.
1,000 chapters seems so enormous to me.
It is enormous, but when you study a Rambam, if you do it in depth, you can spend a lifetime on one paragraph. At any rate, so this is what Rabbi Gamliel, the son of Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, is saying, that when you take Torah and you have it embellished with the secular knowledge, that is beautiful, because then there's the right balance. But you have to recognize that it's only an embellishment. It's like icing on the cake. If you have cake with icing and you're not on a diet, you can eat it and enjoy it, but you're not going to eat the icing by itself. Eating the icing by itself is not very wholesome. I'm not so sure it's so wholesome if you eat it with the cake, but it's not so beautiful. It's only beautiful when it's an adornment. The Talmud says, and there's another thing about the Talmud says about adornments, that a rabbi, a scholar of Torah, should not have any ego. So one authority says he has to have some ego, because if he doesn't have any ego, people are going to step on him and no one will respect his opinions. And the Talmud says it should be like in a plant. Sometimes a plant could have like a little adornment on top of it. It could be like a little adornment on top, a little icing on the cake would be a modern day analogy. But if you make the adornment the main thing, then it's not nice anymore. Some say, and I don't remember the source for this, but some say that the Rambam was an embodiment of this. Maimonides was steeped in Greek philosophy. His Guide for the Perplexed is based to a great extent on the teachings of Aristotle, whom he revered greatly as one of the greatest minds that ever lived. So Maimonides, even his Mishna Torah, his encyclopedic work of Jewish law, is so systematic, totally different from the way Jewish law was arranged by Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi arranged it in a way that the modern mind can't understand. If you want to learn the laws of, let's say, marriage, there's a tractate in the Mishna that deals with marriage. Okay. But if you want to know all the laws of marriage, you have to study all the other volumes, because you'll find bits and pieces scattered all over. The whole way the Mishnah deals with subjects by association. So you can start off with one subject and you end up with a totally different subject. That's not Yafeh. That's not nice. That's not beautiful to the mind of especially of a beginner. Maimonides made everything beautiful. He combined Greek aesthetic beauty together with Torah. Someone once told me that he went to the Rebbe and told the Rebbe that he was a student in the yeshiva, I don't remember which yeshiva, that he was going to Yeshiva University, and he was going to major in philosophy. And the Rebbe gave him a blessing, and he didn't understand it. The Rebbe said, may it be from emes to Yafeh. In the prayers we say how God is emes, v'yatziv, v'nochem. These are 15 expressions of truth. The last expression is v'yafeh, and beautiful. So I told him, what the Rebbe was telling you is that you have to have emes, you have to have truth first, which is Torah, and at the end you throw in the Yafeh, the beauty, the aesthetic beauty that you get from study of secular knowledge. So maybe that's what the Mishnah over here means, that Torah study with derech eretz, with secular knowledge, is beautiful if you know how to embellish it properly. You don't overdo the embellishment, and you use it the right way to embellish the Torah.
Isn't it true that the Rebbe felt that there was nothing that was secular knowledge, that everything was contained within Torah, and he would actually ask people to say secular experts, and he'd provide the parallel within Torah? Right.
The Rebbe said, and it's based on earlier teachings, that everything in the world can be found in the Torah in some form. Most people, 99.99999% of people, could not do that, find everything in the Torah. And if you want to find the cure for cancer, no one is telling you to look for it in the Torah. Yeah. Because when they find it, they'll realize that it was already there in some form. The Rebbe was able to do that, and he challenged. I heard this from my teacher, who heard it from the person who was there, who the Rebbe said to the scientist that everything is in the Torah. Every concept, every theory, every philosophical idea can be found in Torah. And when he didn't believe the Rebbe said, "You can ask me." And he asked the Rebbe three things. One was from philosophy, one was from chemistry, one was from medicine. And the Rebbe, without any hesitation, showed him the source in Torah to all those three, and he was floored by that. But that's not the place where you go to get this information, except if you're on that level of a Rebbe, you can do that. And the Rebbe never advocated for doctors to try to get the cure for illnesses from the Torah directly. But when we're talking about Torah with secular knowledge, there's a certain balance, and that balance is a beautiful balance if it's done the right way. Then it says in the Mishnah, for toil in them both keeps sin out of one's mind. The Hebrew word The Hebrew word is the toil in them both makes you forget sin. That's the literal translation. Well, they're not wrong when they say keeps it out of one's mind. That's what forgetting is. But the Hebrew word shikha is forgetting. What does that mean? What is forgetfulness? When you forget something, and not because of age. What was I saying? If you forget something, it's a sign. If your mind is, you're not suffering from any type of dementia. But if a person forgets things, very often it's a sign that you're insensitive to it. You don't care about it that much. If you forget your wife's anniversary, isn't it? No. If you forget your wife's anniversary and she gets upset, there's a good reason why she gets upset, because that means it's not so important to you. That's what forgetfulness indicates. And
the secular date and the Hebrew calendar date.
That's two anniversaries. And the funny thing is, you should remember it's your own anniversary as well, usually. Yeah, isn't it? So, in a negative way, if a person forgets something positive, that shows insensitivity in a bad way. But it could also, insensitivity could be a good thing. If you're insensitive to sin, that means you just don't care for it. It doesn't speak to you. And you forget to sin. How many people do you know that forget to sin? They were about to sin, and they said, I don't know what I was about to do. Usually you don't forget to sin. You forget to do a mitzvah, but you don't forget to sin. But if you're involved, your mind is involved in Torah, and you're involved with work. Let's take the word work here literally, the way they translate it over here. Worldly occupation. If you're involved, you have no time. You have no time to think about sinning. You're distracted from sin. Distraction is a very, very positive thing. Every trait that's negative is also positive. Forgetfulness is a negative trait, but it could also be positive. Distraction is negative, but it could also be positive when you're distracted from the wrong things. We're going to have to finish this Mishna next week, God willing.
What does Yam mean? Ayin Mem Lamed Yod Mem.
Amelim, toil.
Work. Amal is work.
Toil. It's more than just work. It means toiling and work. You could work in a very casual way where you're not really toiling, and you could, like you're a member of Congress or something like that. But then there's someone who toils in their work. The construction crew, they toil. The emphasis on work, if we take that interpretation of it, the emphasis on work is supported by a medrash that says that when Abraham was told by God, Lech lecha, get away from where you live and go to the land that I will show you. Nowhere in the Torah does it say that God showed Abraham where to go. It just says Abraham went, and he arrived in Canaan, and he went from this place to that place, but it doesn't say that God said, here, I want you to stop here. So how did Abraham know where to go?
Derech eretz.
So the GPS, I don't think was invented yet. So the Medrash says he went through places and he saw people sitting on their porches and drinking beer and having a good time and not working. He says, this is not a place where God wants me to be. And then he comes to Canaan and he saw people toiling in work. He says, this must be the place. Now, you get an impression here that Canaan was a really righteous place. No, it was the most despicable place on earth. It was the most degraded place on earth. The people were idol worshippers. They were immoral. The Torah itself says the two most immoral places in the world were Egypt and Canaan. It was a competition. Who could be more depraved?
Beyond Sodom?
Well, Sodom was part of Canaan. It was the dregs of the dregs. So why would he think Canaan is where God wants him to be if the people were not good people? They were not good in any way. The answer is, he knew that his mission was to change the world. But if you go to a place where people are idle, idle is idle. I-D-L-E is I-D-O-L. It's an idol. It's a sign that you don't take anything seriously in life. You have no purpose in life. Even if a person is depraved, a person is immoral, you could work with that person. You could bring them to an understanding of something higher if they sense that they have a mission in life. Even if their mission is not holy, but at least they have some potential. So Abraham knew, this must be the place God wants me to go. I'm not going to succeed in any other place where people are indolent. The people are not into doing anything of any value, of any substance. So it works. When a person is busy, they can't sin. That's a simple fact. We'll have to continue, God willing, next week.
Is there a scheduled Seneca 1?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a week from this Tuesday.
Okay.
A week?
That would be the...
I'm not sure if it's a week or 2 weeks.
Okay.
I'll call my son, if maybe he knows. I'm sure he knows. Well, Levi?
Yeah.
Are you there already? When is the class, the Seneca one? A week from Tuesday or 2 weeks from Tuesday?
Very special.
2 weeks from yesterday. Okay.
Thank you.
Sehr gesund. I have the whole Mishnah Torah in one volume, all 1,000 chapters in one volume. But
Forgive my ignorance, there was the Mishnah initially with Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi codified the Mishnah initially, and then the Gemara came afterwards, and then that comprises of
the Babylonian, and first the Jerusalem Talmud, and then the Babylonian Talmud.
Which to go, that's the Gemara?
That's the Gemara.
Okay.
Gemara and Talmud are interchangeable terms.
Mishnah is not interchangeable with Talmud?
Sometimes when you say Talmud, you mean Mishnah, and because the way the Talmud is printed, it's printed with Mishnah and then followed by Talmud in the same volume. Every Mishnah has its section of Talmud.
Oh, I see.
So it becomes right now. You can find Mishnayos can be without Talmud, but you never find Gemara without Mishnah.
That makes sense.
Gemara without Mishnah would be untenable because you can't study the commentary. Right. But you can have Mishnah without Gemara, which is why commentaries on the Mishnah, what they do is they give you the digest of what the Gemara says.
I see.
And explain things, so you can
It's like a teaser of what came after.
You can study Mishnah without Gemara, as long as you know the commentaries, because Mishnah cannot be taken at face value. Sometimes it was written deliberately in a cryptic way to force you to.
People study Mishnah.
Yeah, but they do it with translations, with commentaries. If you just translate it, sometimes you don't get the right meaning of it because there's the
Same thing with the Gemara.
Right, but the Mishnah more so.
Did Nachmanides and Nachmanides came first, and then
Maimonides came first. Maimonides was 1135 and passed away in 1204.
It's alphabetical.
And Nachmanides was born after Maimonides, or close to the time he passed away.
Oh, okay. Did they know one another?
No. Nachmanides,
Nachmanides know Maimonides?
no, he never met him, but he knew of him. He was his major defender and major critic.
Well, you find out with all the poskim, right?
What?
All the poskim are like that. When you look at
Oh, there were some critics that were not defenders of Maimonides.
but what you get is that they'll say Nachmanides disagree with the Rambam, disagree with Ibn Ezra on this.
Right,
Rashi.
right. But there were some commentaries on Maimonides who just don't stray from Maimonides one bit. They anything he says they accept. They don't argue. And there were some critics who didn't accept anything he says.
When did Rashi live?
Rashi he passed away in the beginning of the 12th century, 1105, I think.
And I have this wrong, but I thought I had heard in some Jewish teaching that, maybe in like Zohar or some Kabbalistic, that the 13th century, the 1200s were like a preeminent time of spiritual infusion of energy globally.
Right. There was a major push for the teachings of Kabbalah, which were around before that. There were books already written before that, but in the 12th century, 12th, 13th century, there was an explosion of Kabbalah relative to what was there before. Nachmanides was one of
And in non-Jewish world, Rumi, Dogen, these are the pillars of.
Well, it says in Koheles, God creates this against that, holiness against impurity.
Yeah.
And when there was holy teachings of Kabbalah, the unholy version of it also came to the fore. Nachmanides there's a debate if Maimonides was ever exposed to Kabbalah. There's a big debate about that, but Nachmanides openly discusses Kabbalah. Maimonides' greatest critic, the Raavad, was also a major Kabbalist.
So Rambam is more of a rationalist.
There's no question about that he was a rationalist, but did he have access to Kabbalah?
Who exposed?
Because many of his predecessors were Kabbalists of the Gaon.
Nachmanides to Kabbalah.
Who was his teacher on Kabbalah? I don't know. That's a good question. You can Google it. I have to get AI on my search.
Listen, AI could rewrite the Gemara for you. My father translated 2 volumes of the Mishna Torah.
Oh, did he?
Okay, Nachmanides' principal teachers of Kabbalah were Rabbis Ezra and Azriel. Yeah, I heard the names, but I didn't remember them.
Of course, there's a gazillion Rabbi Ezra still in the
What country was Nachmanides born in?
Spain.
In Maimonides?
Spain, but different parts of Spain. Maimonides was Cordova, and Nachmanides was Garanda. Well, I don't know what it would be in English.
Yeah, Spain was the place for a long time.
But he was in Christian Spain. Maimonides was in Muslim Spain.
Oh, yeah, that's the guide to the perplex came out of that because it was Muslim Spain, right?
Right. The Muslims there were steeped in Aristotelian philosophy, and that's where he got his own. Maimonides was a student of Muslim philosophers, physicians, astronomers. And Nachmanides was in a Christian country, and he had the big debate against Christianity, and he was forced to leave Spain, and that's when he went to Israel.
That's where the winner loses.
He was afraid to debate, and the king promised him that he won't be punished if whatever he says, and he won the debate, and he was forced to leave.
It was usually the Jews who renegade Jews who thought the Christians were questions to ask.
Let's say that again.
Renegade Jews are Jews that converted Christians.
Oh yeah, they were the ones who engaged in the debates. I have a whole book
Or
of
fed the questions to the...
I have a whole book of the debates between rabbis and different Christian scholars, including Nachmanides' debate.
I remember this story from a very, probably 3 decades ago, where someone told me this story where, I don't know, it was probably whoever formed our current Western calendar, approached rabbis and said, look, we've done it. We have I guess it's a solar calendar. And they said, this is the amount of time in a day. And the rabbi said, oh no, you're off. You're off by a little bit. Like the rabbi, they thought that they had solved time and the deconstruction of time and the allotment of time and days and years and months.
Well, it's changed. What year did we change from the time December 5, December 6? The old Siddurim was different. It's a day earlier, right?
I think it's a day later.
5 and now it's 5-6.
Oh, now it's a day later.
In fact, it's where else are you going to find in the Siddur an English date?
Yeah,
Right?
right. That's an astronomical thing.
Because it's really crazy. You look and all of a sudden, it's like everything else is all Hebrew. It's just going to cut you. This is what you do here. And then December 5 to 7, 6, depending upon it's a leap year.
Yeah.
And someday it'll change to 6, 7. The earth is slowing down. I won't be here, but
Why wouldn't you be here? Mashiach will be here, and everyone will be living forever.
No, I can't.
would it be possible when Heschel comes
No, with him, I asked the same thing.
to say
I didn't ask what he did. I said, how come it's real? I said, we
we're
understand.
going to make some changes? Like, could Hashem say, which he did say, not interested in this.
That's when the people were sinning. But otherwise, it's reich nechoach. It's the opposite.
Right.
It's one thing that,
The anthropomorphic view of God is enjoying, right?
well, whatever it means, doesn't mean physically.
You think about all the terms.
Right, but the only place where it uses the term that it's pleasant fragrance to God is a sacrifice. And Maimonides was harshly condemned for giving a reason for sacrifices in the guide, that it's to wean people off idol worship.
I was curious.
He didn't like that idea?
The Rambam gives that idea, and his critics,
He did give that idea.
yeah, his critics.
Makes a lot of sense. He's a rationalist.
But the Rambam doesn't say that in his Mishna Torah. He says the opposite, that it's a very high spiritual service. So he was writing the guide for a certain audience. That's how they defend him. That he was writing for a special audience who wouldn't be impressed if he gave him a spiritual explanation.
I was wondering about the story of Noah's drunkenness and then his sons clothing him. There's no way that could be interpreted as a kind of ecstasy for what God did for him, and then the clothing is sort of the return from the ecstasy back into the
Well, the fact that he got drunk, I attribute, one could say it's because he was so depressed that he had to drink away his misery.
But what if it was the inverse?
But I think it's the opposite, that he was so grateful to God that he celebrated, but his problem was that he celebrated by himself. If he had
Must have been planning on it because it takes time to make.
if he was drinking with his
He had to
kids,
bring it on the ark with him.
if his wife was there with him, she wouldn't have allowed him to drink that much.
This is Noah. Well, there must have been, it has to be around because otherwise it wouldn't be any future generation.
Right.